Hi everybody, Greg Heilman with the Sound on Stage. Today we are doing an update to our Get to Know a Theater segment we did a few years back with Seattle Rep. We're joined today by their newest and latest artistic director, Dámaso Rodríguez. Dámaso comes with a plethora of experience, co-founder of LA's Furious Theater, 8 seasons in residence at Pasadena Playhouse, 9 seasons as artistic director of Artist Rep in Portland, Oregon's longest running theater, and now you've joined the list of wonderful artistic directors that have joined us here at Seattle Rep. Welcome to the show, Dámaso. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Glad to be here.
Okay, thanks for taking some time. I've been wanting to chat with you, but I wanted to make sure you got settled in here and acclimated. Before we talk about how that's going, what brought you to Seattle and the Rep? What was intriguing enough to bring you here?
Yeah, well, I've been in the Pacific Northwest for the last 11 years now. I was in Portland, like you said, and so lots of reasons to visit Seattle over the years. I had directed a play at Intiman back in 2010, so I had a 5-week rehearsal process and auditions where I felt a part of the theater community in that little window of time. I directed a reading at Seattle Rep in 2020, right before the pandemic shut down. We did a musical reading here. So I had that last little point of contact. So I knew the theater a little bit from those interactions. I already loved Seattle as a city, and I've been working in regional theater for about 20 years, and I had taken a break emerging from the pandemic in 2021 after those 9 seasons at Artist Rep and several seasons before that at Pasadena and LA. And I was just wondering what would happen if I took a break. Would I want to, would I do something else? Would I write? What would I do? How much freelancing would I do, et cetera? And what happened over those 2 years, I had been consulting with theaters around the country, and I felt excitement about getting back into leadership. As hard as it is, right, to be part of the movement, the movement of leaders and theater makers around the country as we make a new model post-pandemic. But I wanted to do it in a theater that was doing both new works and classic works. Mm-hmm. And the Rep, I would argue, across the history of the theater company, that dynamic spread between new and classical, between musicals and dramas and comedies, multidisciplinary work that's happened here over the years, including in this season. I mean, that most closely reflects my background as a director. Okay. In that I've been able to bounce back and forth from working with the playwright in the room on a new script to play by Noel Coward or Shakespeare or Tennessee Williams, and I love that conversation.
Yeah, I mean the Rep has always been the theater for me to come to and know I'm going to go away thinking about the show afterwards. Yeah. We saw the premiere of Come From Away here before it went to Broadway, and like you said, the mixture of new works and existing works, but always done smartly, I think. Yeah. Now, how has the acclimation been for you settling in here at the Rep and then within the theater community in Seattle at large?
Yeah, well, I guess I've been here about 11 months now. It was around this time last year that I came up for my final interviews, and I started at the end of July, and I still feel very new. My family has been in Portland for the last year because my son is a senior in high school, and so I've been commuting. So on some level, I still feel very much in transition, but we're all about to be living here together in July. I've become more and more acclimated inside the building and in the theater community in terms of seeing plays around town. Mm-hmm. Having, there's those initial interactions with folks where you meet in a lobby or you have an initial get-to-know-you coffee, but you really start to feel more part of the community when you keep bumping into each other.
Sure.
And you've had that third or fourth conversation, or you found yourself working together on something very specific, and that's starting to happen for sure. I feel like even in the year that I've been here, when I compare the fall of 2023 with the winter of 2024, working into the spring, I've observed the theater scene, however you would define that, kind of, gaining momentum. I think the work in the last few months has been really exciting.
Sure.
Just all across town, like the variety of plays, mm-hmm. the significance of and the ambition of the productions across theaters across town of various sizes. I was really excited to be joining that community.
Well, you mentioned COVID earlier, and you mentioned the theater, kind of gaining momentum. Have you noticed, because now you've been here through pretty much the full, what I consider the first full season after COVID. I mean, I know we've had it full season, but where nobody's necessarily so hesitant to get out. I see crowds that are bigger. Have you seen the same thing? Have you seen more people coming to the shows as time's going on and we get farther away from?
It seems like that. Yeah. I mean, numerically, it's actually happening. I guess we can back it up at Seattle Rep. Is it a combination of people being more comfortable going out and the work being good? Like we just there's been a nice string of plays here and around town, and I think that consistency of really worthwhile theater experiences for audiences maybe inclines them to coming back. So I hope there is that build. I've definitely seen it. We know the numbers are not what they were, right? And yet the theaters are starting to feel more full. I think.
And I imagine it builds. The more crowds come in, the more active the actors become, et cetera. So hopefully it continues.
Yeah, I think so. And when we just did a production of Fat Ham, which had a huge interactive kind of feeling and really celebratory finish, and we have Jinx Monsoon coming in right now next, and so I think theater is kind of a gathering place of community, kind of celebratory. Atmosphere is what people are craving too. They're craving the event.
I was going to use that exact word, event. Yeah.
I mean, and a very different kind of play, but having seen the Lehman trilogy, right? That also felt like an event. You know, and there were people there. This was an act.
Yeah, and Bed Trick over at Seattle Shakespeare right over here. I mean, so many great shows.
Yeah, I saw that as well, and it was I felt the energy was what an exciting, new playwright and this new play we didn't know what to expect by Keiko Green. That was just people were just caught up in it and spreading word of mouth.
Yeah, and when one theater succeeds, they all succeed. So
that's right.
We're all in this together. So let's talk about your philosophy of programming. You mentioned a little bit about it, but in the context of your next season here at Seattle Rep, what should audiences expect next year, and how have you tried to weave your sort of philosophy in through the schedule?
Yeah, well, there's one of the things I'm really committed to in terms of the season is that the season, whether or not you experience this one show, which is fine, we love that. You want to see a show or two, that's great. You're welcome. We want you here, but it's designed as a full experience. So that sort of ebb and flow I was talking about earlier, from classical to contemporary, timely to timeless, we call it. The variety of aesthetics, playwriting aesthetics, the given circumstances of the plays, even the designs, like that kind of buoyant experience of you're always going to get something a little bit different, or something that is a counterpoint to the thing that you just saw. Go from epic to the intimate. That is the approach. Now, and then I would say that you'll see in Seattle Rep season, most of our materials for next year, it tends to say "built by the Rep." That's a hashtag that has been branded before me, but we're doing more of that than we have in a number of years. So it's a 7-play season. The season is slightly shorter than it has historically been. Sometimes it's 8 plays, or even 9 plays back in the day. This is 7. It's 1 less because we're doing a renovation of our lobby this summer, which had been part of our capital campaign that predated the pandemic, and it's funded. And so you'll kind of come into a freshened up lobby space that complements the interior of the Bagley Wright stage, which was renovated during the pandemic.
Yep.
You're going to see everything you see here up until the final show, which is we're bringing the Seven Fingers, the Cirque troupe from Montreal, back for another piece that ends the season, and it's a piece inspired by Romeo and Juliet called Dual Reality. But the 6 shows leading up to that are all going to say "built by the Rep," which means they were not only made in our scene shops, in our costume shops, but rehearsed in this building, cast here. Even if there are some actors from out of town, it's a homegrown show, which I think is really leaning back toward our roots. This was founded as a resident producing theater. It was originally a repertory company where you had, you could see in back-to-back nights 2 different plays, right, with the same actors in them. We don't do that, but I do think of it as the theater community, the theater scene in Seattle, right? That's our company, right?
Sure.
In a way, that's the philosophy. So what are plays that we can do really well? And for audiences, I think back to the theater was founded in 1963 with a production of King Lear and repertory with a play called The Firebugs, which was a relatively new contemporary European piece at the time, kind of provocative and a counterpoint to that. And so I wanted to make sure that every year, not just one, but 2 or 3 plays that we would designate as classic. And classic to me means, they've endured over the decades, whether that, or centuries. Mm-hmm. And, so we have The Skin of Our Teeth by Thornton Wilder, which is an 80-year-old play, but interpreted, I think, through a contemporary lens. Because
you're directing that one,
I'm
right?
directing that one. And so that kicks off the season. And it nods to our public works program, which have been every other year or so we do a huge pageant production with 100 community members on stage. This isn't exactly that model, but it's a play that will have dozens of community members participating alongside an equity cast of 15.
Great.
And so it's an old play, right, from 1941, but it's provocative, and folks will be surprised at how modern it feels. It's also a play that you do whenever the world's teetering on the brink of change. It's an election year play, without being specifically about politics and elections. And so, that was the initiating gesture in the season. So in terms of how I think about season planning, it does kind of start with that, okay, what's the sort of the beginning impulse, right? And it just felt like Skin of Our Teeth. And that's a play that I've directed before. I've just sort of carried it in my pocket for years. It's one of my pieces as a director that I'll pitch to other artistic directors. And so you start with that, and then the planning part becomes like, all right, what's the counterpoint to that? And we go right to a really new play that just won the Pulitzer Prize called Primary Trust by Ebony Booth. And it's intimate, and it's really character-centered, and it's kind of an empathy machine. And that'll be in our 300-seat theater, the Leo K. So we're in the 700-seat theater with the big, epic Thornton Wilder play, and then right after that, we're in our more intimate space with we didn't develop the play here, but it was premiered in 2023 in New York, and it happened to win the Pulitzer Prize just a couple weeks ago, and you're getting a chance to see that in Seattle.
Excellent.
Pretty quickly, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of go, that's the ebb and flow, and that plays more, it's comic, but it's more dramatic. So around the holidays, we're going to do Noel Coward's Blithe Spirit. We don't have our, on some level in season planning, for an artistic director of a resident regional theater like this, it's like, what are we going to do about the holidays, around the holidays? Mm-hmm. And if you don't have your standard Christmas Carol, right, or White Christmas, which our peer theaters in town, ACT and Fifth Avenue, do those. We didn't get that tradition going back in 1963 here at the Rep, so it's sort of what do we do around the holidays when people's families are gathering, their households are intergenerational. They got some downtime, what do they want to do? And our theory right now is like, okay, well, what if it's comedy? What if it's something you can share in community? And there's a nod to Christmas Carol, and that Blithe Spirit is also about a ghost.
Yeah.
Which, you could argue Christmas Carol is a ghost story.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a little underground joke. But so we're back into a classic 20th century play, this one British. And then in the spring, we start to move into more contemporary work. We have a world premiere by Lauren Yee, who wrote Cambodian Rock Band, which was seen in Seattle recently. She wrote The Great Leap, which is a play that was produced all over the country and at Seattle Rep. And it's called Mother Russia, or Periods of Collapse. And it's a geopolitical comedy set right after the fall of the Soviet Union. Nice. It's not about today, but in a way it's about today.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of distance.
It's funny how that works.
And that's a play where Lauren will be in residence here, making changes to the script, working, developing it here at Seattle Rep, which we have a huge history of doing that. So I wanted to make sure even though it takes a little bit of time to develop new work, and I'm just still getting started, this was a play that I have known for a few years, and we were lucky to get the first production of it, and Lauren wanted to come work on it here with us. So that's happening. Then there's another play I want to point out by Pearl Clegg called Blues for an Alabama Sky, which is a play that was written in 1995, but it's set in 1930 in Harlem. In many ways, it feels like an older play, but it's a relatively modern play. But we're saying this is a classic now. It's getting revived, and once a play starts getting revived, like I said earlier, it has an enduring quality, a timeless and timeliness. And so that's sort of our third, which I would call a piece of classic theater. And then you have the Lauren Yee piece. We have Primary Trust, which is a brand new play. And then we have a play called Laughs in Spanish by Alexis Shear, which is a relatively new play, again, premiered in the last couple of years, and it's getting done around the country. And it's set in an art gallery in Miami in the present, and it's basically all the paintings in the gallery have been stolen. And then, that's how it lights up, so you can imagine where it goes from there. And then we finish with a presentation of The Seven Fingers, which is an extraordinary Cirque performance.
Yeah.
It has more of a link to the rep's roots in that it's using Shakespeare as a starting point. And that's an example of when we bring a show in that we don't build here, that doesn't have that built by the rep marker, it's maybe something we couldn't do. We're not going to build a Cirque company that is trained together for years and devises their own work, but they do that. And so it maybe complements and kind of shares another theatrical discipline that isn't maybe our mainstay with audiences.
Yeah.
So that's the lineup.
Excellent. So it sounds like an exciting season. The one thing I always ask artistic directors, and it's more usually geared towards the community theater level folks, is striking the balance between familiar shows, because you have to sell tickets to fill seats, to make money. I know there's grants and donations and things like that, but to generate ticket sales, a lot of theaters will bank on the familiarity of a name or something like that. But there's also shows that are important to show that the people may not see. But then there's also the reputation. I think the rep has a reputation for the sorts of shows that you're talking about, and it seems like it fits into the model. So do you feel that you have that sort of advantage for a reputation, that you don't have to worry about that balance of having a familiar name to bring people in?
I think that we want to grow the audience, right? Always want to grow the audience, expand the audience, introduce the work of Seattle Rep and theater in general to more people. And so I think we have to be really aware of what's drawing folks. But even with recognizable titles, right, that's still probably a recognizable title to someone who is already grown up going to the theater or is already a theater goer. And so I think hanging on to the mission and sort of our identity over the decades, which is generally there has to be a really strong reason to do the play that is art-centered, content-centered. How is this play responding to the moment we're living in? I think that's really important here. I know that's important in a lot of theater companies. So that's the driver. I think right now, investing in a longer conversation with audiences, right? Mm-hmm. Just in the way I described the season being kind of a long-form narrative, right?
Sure.
So it's in all the challenges facing the theater in terms of, income not being what it used to be, diminished audiences, all of that. I don't think they're going to get fixed, if you will, or addressed off of a hit show. So what we're doing is investing in sort of our values, our artistic values, our process values, and trying to just become consistent, not only through the quality of our work over time, but with our invitation to come see work, right? And to make sure there's a lot of different kinds of theater here on stage, right? And so, I would say I'm not prioritizing the hot title on its own, right? It's mission, it's the why we do the work, and I would say it's experience. So there are more comedies in the season than I would say are typically programmed, right? More plays that you could call a comedy, right? And that's responding to how people are feeling, right? And what's going to make it worth driving across town and parking and figuring out how to find a ticket at the price that works for you, all that, right? And so responding to that, and I think maybe the work is more heart-centered next year, right? Or the takeaway is generally a little more hopeful, because that's what we need, right? The Skin of Our Teeth is a play about humanity, right? It's a big metaphorical gesture. It's the Antrobus family, but they represent all of us. And the family keeps facing a crisis, an end of the world at the end of each act. But the play is about, hey, we have the capacity to rebuild even after great difficulties. Yeah. And so I would say that's what we're leaning into, is that what is that feeling at the end of the play that's going to make you want to tell somebody about it? Tell somebody about your experience, as opposed to like the hot title that is going to make the financial equation work.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, one other question, you mentioned repertory before, and I think you answered my initial question, which was going to be, so I was spent last week in Ashland at Oregon Shakespeare. I know you've had some experience down there as well. Plus, you have extensive experience with repertory and the roots of Seattle Rep. Is true repertory something that is viable? Is it only viable in certain places like Ashland's got the advantage of that it's kind of out of the way, but in a big city like this, can repertory work?
That's a great question. I mean, the answer that the regional theaters gave like about 30 years ago was no, right? Because so many of the founding regional theaters were repertory companies, Right now, it tends to work in a festival environment, right? It's an Oregon Shakespeare Festival. Even though the Oregon Shakespeare Festival runs for 10 months, when you go there, you have a festival experience.
Sure.
You go there, you're probably from out of town, for a few days or a week even, and you get to see a whole bunch of plays in a compressed period of time. And that works, there are several festivals around the country that still operate in that repertory model. Could it work, in Seattle at this moment? I hesitate to say no, because part of the process right now, I think all of us in this rebuild moment coming out of the shutdown of the pandemic is myth busting. I don't know, maybe we've told ourselves for all these years it can't work, but have we really dug into it? I'm open to exploring that question, like really looking at it and proving it again. It's not a priority right now. It's not
Sure.
I didn't interview for the job of artist saying we're going to bring repertory back. But I do think there are some exciting things about it, right? But even I was just in London at the National Theatre, which pre-pandemic was rotating repertory, and it was one of the, they're one of the most resourced theaters in the world, and they're not doing rep right now. They used to have 5 shows in rep apparently in 2019, and now they have 3 shows not in rep.
Oh, okay.
So there must be something to the cost of it, right? It's also the reason it maybe works in a festival environment is, in theory, a festival is there's just kind of like a concentrated environment, even for the company.
Yeah.
The actor, like a lot of folks are even that are working at a festival are just there for a season or 2, right? And so it's kind of all in all the time.
Yeah.
I directed at Oregon Shakespeare during in 2018, and as the director, I was only working on 1 show, but I was surrounded by people who were working on 3 shows at once, and it's a very immersive, intense experience.
So a couple of kind of just personal-ish questions, I guess.
Sure.
So you were born in Miami.
Yeah.
Your work is predominantly on the West Coast. What brought you west?
So I ended up in growing up in Dallas-Fort Worth area. So my parents moved when I was young, and so I ended up there, and I went to Texas A&M University, not to study theater specifically. I secretly wanted to, and eventually I did declare myself a theater major and said I was going to go be an actor to my parents. But when I was in college, I got into improvisational comedy, and so I was part of an improv group that I founded there with my friends, and it's still there all these years later. And we became aware of Chicago as, the mecca for improvisation.
Yeah, Second
satire,
City,
City, all these incredible artists that had come through there, whether or not they went into comedy.
Sure.
And so it seemed like, and Steppenwolf Theater, became aware of Steppenwolf, and so it just seemed like a great theater town to get started. I've heard of folks thinking of Seattle that way, depending on where, you kind of get out of college and you're like, where's the cool theater happening in a city that maybe isn't New York or LA? And so for me, that was Chicago. Drawn by knowing, having been an improviser at that point for 4 years or whatever it was, knowing, well, there's nothing that really stops you from performing if you can just find a space, a couple chairs, that's all you need. And so I thought I could just get started there. And I had 3 years in Chicago, and it was New York or LA, and I was with a group, and I think just enough of us were drawn to the West Coast, and there I went.
Yeah. Well, I'm one to talk. I grew up in Pennsylvania and migrated my way out here. So All right, well, final question. What is, if you had any show that you could direct, like do you have a dream show that you would like to direct, whether it's here or somewhere else?
Oh gosh, well, I'm doing one right now with The Skin of Our Teeth. I mean, that's a show that I feel like I just keep working on, even though I've directed it before. And I'm going to use another show that I've directed before. It's a play that I developed. I did the world premiere, the initial production of, with a playwright named E.M. Lewis, and it's set in Antarctica in 1986 when they were studying the hole in the ozone layer. And it's about a group of scientists wintering in Antarctica. It's called Magellanica, and it's a 5-part, 5-hour epic piece of theater.
Oh, wow.
And it's a beautiful play, and it's the kind of thing you could work on for a long time, but it's definitely a peak experience for me, and when I produced it in Portland, I thought, oh, I'd love to see this play have future life. So that's one that's always on my dream
Sounds
list.
intriguing.
Yeah.
Well, Dámaso, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today to talk about the Rep, your philosophy on programming, a little bit about your history and some philosophies. So the season opens up with Skin of Our Teeth in September?
Yeah, September 26th, starts previews, opens October 2nd.
Okay, and then, but this season's not over yet.
That's right.
Jinx Monsoon and the Major Scales opens...
Coming up next week.
Next week.
Yeah, next Wednesday,
Okay.
and running toward the end of June, and then we kind of, it looks like we take a break for the summer, but all we're doing is getting ready for next year.
Yeah. And then the lobby with the remodel, which
Yeah.
I didn't know there was, because I thought the lobby had been remodeled, because there's new restrooms and things like
that interior part, and so now we're going to
Okay.
finish the
Okay.
kind of entryway.
Great, perfect. Well, again, my guest has been Dámaso Rodríguez, Artistic Director here at Seattle Rep. Thank you all for joining me here on Get to Know a Theater with the Sound on Stage. I'm Greg Heilman, and until next time, I will see you at the stage door.